This Tuesday's Getting to Know Ukraine, we are going to continue with the orphan crisis and the reason why it is that. So this map here is Ukraine, and all these pins are orphanages, generally state-run or government-run. And when I was reading, there's 600 to 640 orphanages caring for thousands of children. And to put this into more perspective, currently under the age of 18, children that are in need, in some sort of poverty situation, are 433,000 children. And one of the issues that goes on in state-run orphanages, because of the lack of funding and the government not really having the money to help them, and sometimes, depending on the administration, they just don't care. They're shuffled somewhere else, so out of thought, out of mind. Like I said, some of the problems that state-run facilities have are that children they have to stay in a confined space. Their accommodations, the education, their health care, can generally happen all in one room. And it really does violate their right of privacy and personal space. There's also a lack of condition for the accommodations. So some of the accommodations can be very old or very run down, or you can have multiple beds in one room. And I'll pull up a picture of that to show you. So as you see, this room is basically jam-packed with beds. If it was like a hostel where there were maybe 10 to 12 beds in one room, depending on the size of the room, there's still ample space to get around, and maybe some smaller spaces where they could have their shoes or maybe a spare set of clothes. But in a situation like this, there's just space to sleep, and that's it. So some of you might be saying, well, why don't they transfer the orphan system into more of a family-based care system like what we have in the U.S. with foster homes? And Ukraine has been trying to do that. Their goal is by 2026 that there'll be no longer children placed in orphanages, and their orphanages won't be running, and everything will be switched to a model closer to the U.S. where it's more foster care. But the problem they're having right now, based on this report that I'm reading from 2015, I know it's about 5 years old, but it's still relevant today from the other things that I've read. Guardianship in Ukraine remains the most common form, which means they're in an orphanage of some sense, or the state controls their placement of care in some sense. And it says that more than 53.1 thousand kids are in some sort of orphan system. And in the foster family system, as of 2015, it said 13.3 thousand are raised. But it also tells us that there have been a lot of issues, and it's mainly due to insufficient training of prospective, foster parents or, parent caregivers until they either grow up and move out and go on themselves or get adopted. And it says that the social support of families every year are about 5% of children living in foster families and family-type orphanages leave the family because of conflict situations and unfavorable conditions for their education and development. So even with being in more of a family-type setting, when there isn't enough training, or the foster parents aren't getting enough financial support, or they don't have enough space, and kids are just being crammed there, because it's like, oh, they're with caring adults, it's going to be better. But even when you have tightly cramped accommodations and parents or prospective parents that care for the children, there still raises problems because of lack of space and lack of finances. It's basically transferring the issues from the orphanages to private people's homes. I also learned that in Ukraine, children there have rights, in some cases more so than children in the U.S. Some of the rights that the children in Ukraine have that are being illegally violated when they are in the state-run system. I'm not saying all orphanages violate their rights, but from what I've read, a lot do. And children in Ukraine have the right to education and a biological family. They have the right, if they are orphaned as children and deprived of their parental care, they have the right to deal with parents who are in place of detention. So if they have parents and their parents are in jail, it says here that they have the right to visit them, to see their parents. And a lot of times this doesn't happen because of finances or they're so far away. It says that the children also have the right to preserve family relationships. Separations from siblings, while adoption, placement in a family often occurs. So say if an adoptive family only wants one child, they say they take the brother and leave his sister at the orphanage. That creates a tear there that those two children will never be able to fully get over because they're separated. This person I'm reading this from, their research, they're very much advocating for siblings to go to the same adoptive family and to not split the children apart, because that's all the family that they have remaining. Some of these children, yes, they did lose their parents because of the war or addiction, and their parents are dead. So the only family member they have left is their sibling. And then they're getting torn from their sibling to, in a lot of cases, never see or hear from again. That's just unfair to those children, and it's also against the law in the case of Ukraine. And it also says that the children with disabilities also have the right to be among other children and deprived with parental care to care in foster families. So that it says that children that have developmental disabilities, maybe motor coordination disabilities or some sort of deformment on their bodies, they also have the right to a family and to be in foster care and not just shoved away into a private orphanage that's just those kids and no other kids to play with or learn from. I read some pretty terrible things and saw some pretty horrible pictures where developmentally challenged children or physically challenged children are placed into orphanages with other kids just like them, and unfortunately their caregivers mistreat them horribly and in some cases physically abuse them. And I'm not going to show you pictures of this, but I will tell you that a lot of those children are basically put in straitjackets, hands and feet tied to where they can't do anything, they can't move around, and no, it's not a straitjacket, but they use clothing and tie them and just leave them there. They don't even care for them. I also read an instance where the developmentally challenged and the physically challenged people are still in the government system even when they're past adulthood. And adulthood in Ukraine is 18. They're kept in those systems even though when they're adults, they legally have the rights to walk out, but they can't. And I also read that once when they're adults in that system, that sometimes a lot of the workers that are supposed to be working to help them force the people in care to do their jobs for them. Very unfair, since those people aren't getting paid. So I know that was a little bit tough to hear, but I want to get the truth out there. And I'm not saying that all these institutions are bad. I'm saying that there are issues that can be fixed, and I would like Humanitarian Exchange to help with these issues. And how Humanitarian Exchange can help, it seems cliche to do this or say this because a lot of organizations do help, but unfortunately a lot of organizations have strings attached to their helping. Like, a kid has to go through so many pages in a workbook before they get a toy. The organization has to agree to, photo shoots, interviews, or other terms to receive clothing or food or aid. There's always something attached to the help. And with the organization that I founded, nothing is attached to the help. We just want to help because Christ calls us to help and to give freely to those in need. And the only thing that I would personally hope that from my organization's giving is that, these people, these children see that myself and someday the staff that works for the organization, we're different. We actually care about them. We don't have a limit of you need to meet all these things before you get help. And they see and ask us why we're doing that, and we can point them back to Jesus, saying that, we're Christians and we believe that people are supposed to help one another because we care about each other, not because we want you to do something for us. So with that being said, ways that I would like Humanitarian Exchange to help would be help with supplies needed, basic items for living that you and I take advantage of. Most people in first and second world countries, we don't really have to worry about these things because we have the finances or the jobs to get these things, or services to help get these things, like a Salvation Army or a neighborhood service center. But unfortunately for these orphans and a lot of people in impoverished countries need help. I would not call Ukraine a third world country. I would definitely call them a second world country, but they have more economic problems and problems with employment, so they have a lot less money than other second world countries. So ways that we can help, like I said, needed items for living, which would be weather appropriate clothes, shoes, boots, coats, gloves, hats, socks, all basic needs, things that a lot of us take for granted. Ukraine is a nation that has seasons. It has hot summers, it's got fall, spring, and pretty cold winters. I'm very thankful that they don't have 6 months of winter like we do in Minnesota. The winters are a lot more mild. They're 3 to 4 months usually, from what my friends have told me. But with that being said, with the change of season, changes of weather, hot, cold, warm, rain, sleet, snow, you also need adequate bedding. Not just a sheet and maybe a medium-sized comforter. You need different weights of bedding for each season, because in most of Eastern Europe and a lot of Western Europe, not a whole lot of buildings have air conditioning. So in the summertime it's extremely hot. And the flip side is with heating. I've been to Ukraine, and a lot of the buildings that I were in did not have central AC or central heat. They were all either ran on radiated heat, or still somewhat, some poor buildings I've been in was ran by a fireplace. So it can get very cold without proper heating. So proper clothes is very important for life, for pretty much everyone there. And then, like I said, I'm not saying that all these organizations, all these institutions, all the orphanages are bad. They just don't have the funds and sometimes oversight to keep bad people from working there. But how I would like to aid them is help with finances and or labor to fix rundown buildings and the grounds around the orphanage. It doesn't take a whole lot of money to help in that aspect, especially when you're running off of a dollar versus Haruna. I think I said the name of that currency correctly. The last time I was there, the currency exchange rate was 25 to 1. One of our dollars is 25 of theirs. So our dollars go a lot further, can do a lot more help. And I know that some of you know that corruption is a problem within governmental systems in Ukraine. Even in the U.S., corruption is a problem. So if finances were given out to help with construction or to retrofit and fix older orphanage buildings, myself or someone on the staff would be there to make sure that the money was being spent properly. Another thing that I would like Humanitarian Exchange to do eventually would be to help with language practice, to help teach the kids and the staff English, to help get the kids adopted by foreign families. And then one of the biggest things is because, a lot of these kids have parents or living relatives that can't be adopted, and they have to grow up within the system. So for that, to make that easier on the caregivers and the children that are there, I would like Humanitarian Exchange to foster emotional support to the overworked and understaffed adult caregivers that are there. And that's going to be down the road once we get things rolling, more donations and volunteers coming in. At some point, I would like to be partnered and working with 2, 3, 4 multiple orphanages in Ukraine to the point where we have a good enough relationship where I could bring in a team of people, 4 to 6 people, and just stay at the orphanage, help them fix things, help them care for the kids, and just be a supportive role for the kids, and to give them what some organizations call a love offering, where you give your time, you give your attention, and you give your energy to play with these kids and let them know that they're valued. It says that a lot of these children don't have a whole lot of time with adults. They don't have a whole lot of positive reinforcement from older people because there's just not enough adults to go around. There's so many children and so few adult caregivers that there's not enough adults to care for and value each child. And the best way to do that is if we were to get into that situation, or if I'm just there personally, you show these people that you genuinely care for them and you invest in their lives, and you let them know that regardless of whatever situation they're in, that their lives matter and nobody else is more important than they are, because God loves them just as much as He loves me or anybody else. And yes, the situation they're in isn't fair, and hopefully someday it will get better, but doing whatever we can to foster caring and compassion for these people will help them get on day by day. Another really big important thing is that a lot of these kids don't have any personal possessions. They might have a few sets of clothes. That's it. Most toys would be shared, or if they have something, it was used until it was broken. So one thing that I would like to do with Humanitarian Exchange is, once a year, Christmas is easiest because they all can get gifts at the same time. Do a drive to bring the children Christmas presents, without strings attached. Like I said, there are a lot of organizations, I won't name names, that I have seen, I kid you not, boxes piled high, taller than me. I'm 6 foot. I've seen boxes 6'2", 6'3", 6'5", piled high of unopened Christmas gifts because the kids didn't meet the criteria to receive the gifts, or the organization helping the kids didn't meet the criteria to receive the gifts. So all these packages full of presents, given in good faith by people, remain unopened. And a lot of the givers never know that the gift they gave freely had strings attached. And that's just deplorable. I can't even talk about it. It makes me so upset. So I would like to do a similar thing, but without those strings attached. You know, go there with enough money to buy them gifts in country, because it's cheaper to buy gifts in country than to ship them all with people on an airplane. You know, if there is a big enough team where there's like 6 people, you both take two suitcases. Yes, it's more doable, but it is a lot easier to spend that money in country. And when you're spending the money in country, you're helping stimulate their economy. And that's what they really need, is their economy to be stimulated so more jobs are created. And, you know, an overreaching goal, like I said before, you know, one of the biggest goals would be down the road to have, you know, vetted volunteers that have had background checks to be able to go with me and help these orphanages in any legal way they possibly can, like with repairs, with the kids, you know, with maybe putting on a summer camp that teaches English or arts and crafts or some other skill that these kids could use in adult life. So that's pretty much the overarching goal. And right now, if you're feeling compelled, the best way you can help Humanitarian Exchange by getting involved is just to give financially, whatever you can right now, so that when we return to Ukraine, we can return with money to buy needed items and donate them to an orphanage in hopes to foster a working relationship with this orphanage. You know, showing up to an orphanage's doorstep with, you know, suitcases full or hands full of needed items for their schooling, or needed clothes, and maybe, you know, a few gifts here and there, or, you know, a month's worth of food, sends a larger message of, we are here to help, you can trust us to help, than just a solo person by myself, a missionary that has an organization saying, hey, I have all these good ideas, I want to help you guys, and all I show up there with is my good intentions and maybe some extra money to push along and help them. It's not going to look very good, and not a whole lot of organizations, or even the kids, are going to take you seriously. Like, if you want to do something to help someone, you have to go all out, and you really have to trust that the Lord is going to see you through in helping these people and opening doors for people that are in power to help you make these things happen. So I hope you guys, you know, enjoyed this presentation. You know, it's not really a movie or a cartoon or something fun to be enjoyed. You know, it's information. It's a call to action. You know, I hope that people will get on board and help, and down the road want to take that step and get on that plane with me and take that 16-hour flight to Ukraine to hopefully have your life changed. And maybe some of you down the road that go with me will find their next child waiting for them in an orphanage to adopt. You know, that's my biggest prayer, is that someday that we can live in, you know, a world without orphans or people stricken by poverty. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life, you know, 60, 70 years, however many years I have left, in the pursuit of making that happen. So thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next Tuesday. Goodbye.